Hey guys, this is Mr. Herbst here, and today's focus is going to be on the synapse. So what is a synapse? Well, it is a connection between two neurons. My last video I talked about what a neuron was. If you remember the parts of the neuron, here in blue I have represented the cell body, and then here in red is an axon of a presynaptic neuron. We'll talk about that more in a second. But if you can see here that this axon here from this neuron is actually attached to this blue neuron right here. And right here where they are attached, that is going to be on the focus of today. That's called a synapse. So you can see here that this is a diagram of what's happening at a synapse. This is that small connection right there. So this is a zoomed in picture. In yellow, we have the axon that is giving off the impulse, and in green here I have represented the neuron or the dendrite that is actually taking in the impulse. So we don't call it taking in or sending or receiving, whatever. We call it pre or post-synaptic neuron. So it's a way of determining which neuron is sending the message and which one is receiving. So in yellow here, I have the presynaptic neuron. I'll abbreviate that pre. This is the one that the nerve impulse is passing down. And then there's going to be some stuff happening right here, which I'll talk about later. And there's going to be this neuron here, which is actually a dendrite. Part of the dendrite of that postsynaptic neuron, which is going to pick up the image. So this in green here is the postsynaptic neuron. In between them, you can see there's a little bit of a space, and that actually is called a synaptic cleft. So if you think about it, a cleft chin is a chin that has two parts to it. So a synaptic cleft is the area in between. It separates the two parts of the synapse. So let's go ahead and talk about a little bit of anatomy, what's going on in a synapse. We have these things called vesicles. Those are this thing right here that's holding all those little dots. Those little dots are called neurotransmitters. So a vesicle, think of it like a little storage container. It is actually storing the neurotransmitters. And when push comes to shove and it's time to actually go ahead and release those neurotransmitters, the vesicle will bind here to the membrane of the presynaptic neuron and release them out into the synaptic cleft. So what is a neurotransmitter? Well, it actually is a chemical that can cause a neuron to fire an impulse or stop an impulse. So either we could be what's called excitatory, which actually we're going to make impulses happen, or we can stop those impulses dead in our tracks. So we can actually make things happen or stop them from happening. We have these things called protein receptors. Those are on the opposite side of a synapse, right here on the postsynaptic neuron. They are going to be responsible for taking in or picking up neurotransmitters. So all of these things that I have represented here in purple, those are little proteins that will be responsible for picking up, or the protein will bind to those neurotransmitters, and if we have enough neurotransmitters released, we are going to get an impulse to fire down this postsynaptic neuron. All right, so I want to talk here about a second how a synapse works. All right, so let's imagine for a second that we have a nerve impulse passing through the axon of this presynaptic neuron. There's going to be several things that happen as that impulse or that electricity goes down to this body of the axon terminal right here. The first thing that's going to happen is we're going to have some things called calcium channels, which I'll abbreviate CA. Those are going to open, and we're going to have calcium rush into the cell. And that's going to cause these here vesicles to move to the membrane over here, such as this guy right here. It's close to the membrane, and it is going to bind to the membrane and release its neurotransmitters. All these little dots right here are little neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. Now, those little neurotransmitters are going to be picked up by these protein receptors right here, And if we have enough neurotransmitters, it is going to cause this postsynaptic neuron to send an impulse or continue the impulse. So again, real quick to review, we're going to have an impulse traveling down the axon of the presynaptic neuron, and once it gets to this region right here, we're going to have these calcium channels open up, which is going to cause these here vesicles to bind to the membrane, release their contents, these little neurotransmitters, and into the synaptic cleft, and they're going to be picked up by this protein receptor here. And if the signal is strong enough, we are going to have an impulse be fired by the postsynaptic neuron. Here I have a pretty cool diagram. This is actually real life. This is a microscope image of a synapse. This right here that I'm circling is actually this here is the axon terminal. So this here is this in yellow here is represented here. Also right here, same thing. All of that stuff that is in yellow is right here. You can see all these little circly things right here, and then you can see all the little dotty things inside of them. So the circle things are actually the vesicles. So those are that right there. And the little dotty things are the neurotransmitters. And then you can see that there's this little gap right in here. That is the synaptic cleft right there. And then even take a look, you can see the outline of the next dendrite, which is actually abbreviated DEN over here, dendrite. So this actually, you can see right off the bat, it's more complicated of an image than this one right here. You can see you have tons more vesicles than in a computer animated diagram like this. One thing that sometimes we can get confused about is actually the level of how many things that we have going on at once. You can see that these axons right here, axon 1 and axon 2, are right next to each other, and they're putting their neurotransmitters down into a synapse or synaptic cleft that literally are right next to each other. So these diagrams, they sometimes make things a little bit more simple than they actually are in your body. But this is actually how things work, where we actually have lots of complicated stuff all going on at once. Things are really close together. Anyway, that concludes the synapse. This was Mr. Herbst, and I'm signing off, folks. You all have a nice day.